I want to thank you for having me and letting me talk about, frankly, my favorite book, this one, The Making of the Modern Jewish Bible. And I'm going to speak for maybe 30, 40 minutes, and then I'll stop and we'll have, hopefully everyone can unmute and we'll have a conversation then. And I want to let you know that in your chat box, I'm not so great with technology. In your chat box, I've put a couple of items. One is tonight's lecture, both the outline and documents. And so you can hopefully just open that up. Later on, I'll try to screen share, which I do with about 50% success. And then also in the chat box, I put a listing of all of our Schusterman Center programs for this spring. And you're all welcome anytime it's convenient for you to just join. You'll register. It's very easy to register. And we have lots of people from New York and from actually Germany and Israel, and happy to have some from Denver. So that's also in your chat box. So let me just start by saying, I tried to argue in the book I'm talking about tonight that we're really living, have been living in the modern era in a golden age of Jewish Bible scholarship and study, translation, and synagogue use in three different cultures: Germany, Israel, and the United States. The Bible, the Hebrew Bible, Tanakh, has been elevated to a prominence that we might say, well, hasn't it always been the centerpiece of Jewish learning and life? And the answer is no, it hasn't. As you know, in the yeshiva world, it's Talmud and rabbinic literature that gets the lion's share of the interest. If you were to look at Jewish history, Jewish intellectual history, often codes, often philosophy. There have been an awful lot of modes of focus in Jewish history, and the Bible has often been, obviously, we venerate it, we parade the Torah around, we dress it up, we undress it, we read it, we hold it up so that we can see we're really reading the real thing. Usually there are not that many people in any given congregation who can actually do that. Maybe your Havara is a little stronger than average. But the truth of the matter is, very often the Hebrew Bible is only the pedestal on which the rest of Jewish intellectual life takes place. But in the modern era, it's been more than that. And in Germany, beginning with Moses Mendelssohn, who I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, and all the way up to the Nazi era with Martin Buber really finishing his Bible translation in Israeli exile in 1960, the Bible was a centerpiece of German Jews' desire to present themselves as a religious community. And German Jewry has been called a translation culture. In Israel, as I'm sure a lot of you know, the Hebrew Bible played an enormous role as early as the 1920s and the 1930s for the pioneers. It's part of the Israeli public school education until today, depending on whether it's the state religious track or the state secular track, either as a literary and historical text that you relate to as other literary and historical texts if you're in the religious track. It's also a text in which you study the traditional commentators, and which is seen to be the basis of your religious life. But that role in Israel is also one that elevates the role of the Bible in a very dramatic way from previous centuries. And finally, what we're going to focus on tonight, and I'm just going to take one little example, even from this third Jewish civilization, America, is the role that American and Anglo-American Jews have played in translating the Bible, in writing commentaries on the Bible, and really ever since the 19th century, American Jews have felt the need to have a Bible of their own. And that is really how it's come about that we have not only a huge number of Jewish translations, and we can talk about some of those, but even 3 denominational chumashim. And that's really going to be the very narrow focus of my talk tonight. In other words, when you walk into a synagogue, and I didn't even ask Debbie this, and I ought to have, but if you walk into a synagogue, pretty much, or temple, whatever you wish, anywhere in America, you're going to find in your pew, you're going to find, or on the shelves, and you have to carry them with you to your seats, you're going to find some version of a chumash. And what we think of as Americans, American Jews, as a chumash, we take it for granted it's going to be there when we go to synagogue. And we take a lot for granted that really is very much a modern invention. So for instance, if I were a little more confident in technology, I would try to drag this out of you, but I'm going to just say it. We expect English translation. None of us, I think, go into a synagogue and would be happy if it were only Hebrew, even though certainly in the old country, that's what a chumash looked like if you were in Warsaw in 1850. And so, we have an English translation, but all of us are also walking into a synagogue where there's the Hebrew text. Does it mean that every American Jew can read Hebrew? I don't think so. Does it mean that every American Jew could translate the Torah sitting there? I don't think so. But for a variety of reasons, emotional and spiritual, very real reasons, we like to follow along in the Hebrew. I know my own mom says that when she goes to the temple, she goes to a Reformed temple, she'd rather read the Hebrew not knowing what it means than read the English knowing what it means. She says she's already read it in English. She knows what its contents are, and she gets more out of the service by reading it along in Hebrew. And certainly for bar or bat mitzvah, that's actually, I think, the rule rather than the exception. So we all have these chumashim with English, with Hebrew, with commentary. It's not Rashi. I mean, if you were to say, what is the old world style of chumash, you'd say, well, it's the Hebrew text, maybe an Aramaic translation, and then Rashi. And as you probably know, if you have grandparents or great-grandparents who told you about their Jewish education in Eastern Europe, so we all know what Jewish education was. You repeated a line, you repeated the teacher, the Malamed, would say a line in Hebrew, you'd repeat it in Hebrew, then the Malamed would say it in, what does it mean? Then you would say it in Yiddish, and then, what do we learn from this? And then you would read the Rashi. And that was essentially Jewish education for the formative years, for a few hundred years. So Chumash with Rashi is definitely a thing, but it's not what we would find palatable or what we would find acceptable when we come to synagogue, sit down, and we hit the Torah service. We want a book that we can interact with. So let me talk about the chumashim that we're most familiar with. And again, there are some synagogues that have others. Debbie, would you tell me, does your synagogue have a particular chumash, or does everybody bring their own? Or
well, typical of our community, we have several choices on our cart on Shabbat morning for chumashim, including I think all of the translations that you're going to be talking about tonight, the Oh, you also mentioned it in you looked at some other translations too. Sandy, where's Sandy? Or anybody else? There are a few others that we use as well. So we just choose whichever one we want, and we're good.
Good. Well, I'm going to I'm going to ruin the punchline of this presentation right now, because I'm sure you're going to expect me to say this one is better and this one is worse. But actually, my attitude is they're all good, depending on what you want when you engage in Torah study. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about the three main ones that you'll find and they all have their virtues, and they all have their, they all have things that maybe we would like and aren't there. So for the first half of from the 1930s to the 1970s, a good generation, there was really only one Chumash that American Jews used. We call it the Hertz Chumash. A lot of you grew up with it. It was written by the chief rabbi of England, Joseph Hertz. It was very, very, and then it was reissued a few times, including this. Now, my copy is a little beat up, as you can see. This is the called the Sansino Chumash, and Hertz was very, very. He was writing it in the 1930s, an era of Nazism was on the ascent, when the British were really tightening the screws on Jewish immigration to Palestine. And it was just a terrible time. And Hertz was very, very defensive, but it was also a great, the Hertz Chumash was also a real, booster Chumash in terms of like Jewish pride. Our Torah is from heaven, from God, gave it to Moses, gave it to us. All of this nonsense about various authors of the Torah can be dismissed. Whenever there's a Mesopotamian analog or an Assyrian analog, our version is much better. And basically, it's really a very pugnacious Chumash, and people loved it. It was right for the time, and it really was, I think, important for morale, for Jewish morale in those really terrible decades. By the 1970s, it was pretty obvious that this Chumash was outdated in a scholarly sense, and there had been a lot of advances in Bible studies, and it just was not and also the mood of American Jewry in the 1970s was quite different from that in the 1930s. It was not so defensive and not so anxious. It was Jonathan Sarna, the historian, calls the interwar Jewry the anxious decades. And by 1970, Jewry was not in that place. And so the Reform movement, and I'll start with Reform because they started first, they commissioned this Chumash. It comes in red and blue, the Torah, a modern commentary. In the later versions of this particular Chumash, they made it much more of a synagogue-friendly Bible. In other words, the Hebrew font was enlarged and made clearer. The weekly parashah breaks were made much clearer. The prophetic readings, the Haftarot, came right after the Torah reading, and they took away some of the. It was originally almost a study session Bible for the Reform movement, because, as you know, Reform generally has its main religious service Friday, and often these Reform congregations had a Saturday morning Bible study. So this Chumash actually was created initially as a study Bible. And what's interesting about it, and I'm going to, later on, I'll go to show you this week's, what we're doing this coming Saturday, this coming Shabbat is Vayishlach, and we'll take a look at that. in a minute. But I'll just tell you that this Torah commentary, the principal author was a guy named Gunther Plaut. He was a rabbi in Toronto for many years. Very, very, as you can tell from the name, very influenced by the German Jewish tradition. He left Germany, with a copy of the still unpublished Genesis commentary by a great German Jewish scholar named Benno Jacob. He fled the Nazis with the manuscript in his hand. And the Chumash that he wrote is unabashedly reform and unabashedly modern and liberal. And so I'll just quote, and you don't need to look at this in your chat box, but if you want to, it's right there. I have the quote there. He writes, we believe it is possible to say the Torah is Israel's distinctive record of its search for God. It attempts to record the meeting of the human and the divine, the great moments of encounter. God is not the author of the text, the people are. But God's voice may be heard through theirs if we listen with open minds. Now, if you guys, obviously this is a very straightforward, assertion that the Torah is a human document produced by human beings. And indeed, in the introduction, there's a fairly lengthy discussion of the documentary hypothesis, the famous JEPD discussion of sources that go into the Torah. And Plaut is very, very modern, not only in that, he's very, very modern in his, what he calls his gleanings. In other words, he'll quote from modern psychology, modern literature, obviously from women, which I think needs to be said since the Orthodox Chumash does not. Quotes from Mordechai, there's a great quote from Mordechai Kaplan, the founder of Reconstructionism, which I'll get to in a wee bit. And essentially, it's a modern Chumash for a modern audience. No bones about it. And if this were some kind of class in modern Jewish philosophy, which it isn't, so we would go into the echoes of Martin Buber and Franz Rosenzweig, and that's very clear in that passage I just read to you when you're talking about encounter of the divine and human, and the idea that you can seek God even if you can't get a literal version of God's words anymore. That's all very, very Buber Rosenzweig stuff that Plaut had grown up with. Okay, so this reformer comes in red and blue. The blue reads right to left. The red reads left to right. You can, so whichever you liked better. And then it was revised in 2005 to make it a little bit more synagogue user-friendly, which it is, and also to try to follow the updated JPS version. You had the blue ones. Thanks for putting that in the chat box. Yeah, the blue ones are the right to left ones, but it's the same book. And until 2005, by then JPS Jewish Publication Society had come out with a more gender-neutral version of the Bible translation that's used in this book, and also in Eitz Chaim, the conservative Chumash, which we'll come to in a few minutes. But before I do that, I want to go in chronological order. So the next Chumash that American Jews produced, and again, it's amazing that after a generation of basically Joseph Hertz's being the only Chumash you would find in a shul, all of a sudden there were several based on denominations. This one is from, and you can, if you have any very frum friends and you go to their house, you'll just see this spot. Yeah, exactly. That's the stone Tanakh, exactly. And this is the stone Chumash. By the way, stone is not the editor. That's Nussin Sherman. Irving Stone was a very successful greeting card manufacturer in Cleveland, and gave a whole bunch of money for these Chumashim and Tanachim to be written. The stone Chumash, which is produced by Art Scroll, which is really a phenomenon in all itself, the stone Chumash had a very different attitude toward these matters. And I'll read it, and you can follow it too. And on Rashi, the stone Chumash writes, "The new translation in this volume attempts to render the text as our sages understood it. Where there are differing interpretations, we follow Rashi, because the study of the Chumash has been synonymous with Chumash Rashi for 9 centuries." It's absolutely correct in saying that. I mean, the study of Chumash was indeed Chumash Rashi. The fact that the Art Scroll Corporation and its translators chose not to use the JPS version is certainly very significant. And I want to just be clear about why. When you make a translation of the Hebrew Bible, today, what you do is you assemble all of the manuscripts that you can. You look at other versions, Dead Sea Scroll versions. You look at what's called the Samaritan Pentateuch. You look at this Greek Septuagint to see if they fill in anything that seems missing. You take a look at ancient cognate languages like Akkadian and Ugaritic to see if maybe some of these tough words, and there really are quite a lot of tough words in the Hebrew Bible. In fact, an Israeli, a colleague of mine, was in my office today, and she was saying, I find that the Bible is a lot easier to read in English than Hebrew. She's Israeli. She says, yeah, that's because when they hit a hard part in Hebrew, in Hebrew you leave it, but in translation, you make it more comprehensible. So when the stone Chumash was written, when the Art Scroll Company decided to do this version, they essentially said, we're not going to pay attention. They don't say this, but they do not pay attention to any of the things that would go into what I've just described as a critical Bible translation. They're not interested in that. They're interested in what the Bible was understood to say according to Rashi and Rashi's followers. And that's, I would say, completely legitimate if your main interest, if the Reform Chumash was interested above all in giving modern Jews a modern Bible, the stone Chumash is interested above all in giving readers, whether they're traditional or not, a sense of what the Bible meant, to be very blunt about it, to their great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents going back to the 11th century when Rashi lived. In other words, unencumbered by all of the scholarship, the modern scholarship. And when you get to their commentary, and I'll show this to you. Again, I'll find this and show this to you after the prepared talk. We'll get into look at some of these texts. They're interested in showing you what the Bible meant to Rashi, what it meant to Ibn Ezra, what it meant to Rashbam, what it meant to Nachmanides, and even in their, even in the commentary, you will never see quoted a Reform rabbi. You'll never see quoted a non-Jew. You'll never see quoted some, say, a great piece of modern literature like Thomas Mann's Joseph and His Brothers, that, in my opinion, really can illuminate a biblical passage or character beautifully. But the authors of the Stone Chumash consciously decided that's not what they want. What they want is a Chumash that will be used and give a good sense of essentially Eastern European orthodoxy before the modern era. And I'm not, if I sound critical, I'm really not trying to be. different Humashim actually have different functions for different audiences, and they all have some merit. So let me take a look now at the third one, and then we'll hopefully go to, I'll walk you through a couple of documents. We'll see if I can do this successfully or not. And that is the third one, and that is this is Eitz Chaim. If you belong to a conservative congregation, Tree of Life, Eitz Chaim. So it's a nice little play on words. It's both Tree of Life and also the things that you grab when you lift up the Torah. You know, the wooden rollers. This Chumash. I think that one it's awfully good. It's the one I use. I belong to a conservative synagogue. It has a lot of merits, and one of the interesting thing, and I will first of all just show it to you. And I know it's a terrible way to show something. I'll show it better in a minute when we get to the actual passage. But if you can see here, you have one page. You have the Hebrew and the English. And again, none of us, I think, would be happy if it didn't have a translation. And I don't think any of us would be happy if it didn't have Youth in the Pew commentary. And all the Chumashim that I know of do. What's interesting about Eitz Chaim is it tries to have it both ways. I think actually pretty successfully. So it has like a line in the commentary section. The higher part above the line is what we would call, in the Jewish tradition, we'd call pshat. We'd call the simple, plain, or contextual meaning of the verse. In other words, just what does it mean? Don't give us a homily. Don't give us Kabbalah. Just what does the verse mean? And and so you find that in the top part of the Eitz Chaim commentary. You may have been used to Eitz Chaim for years and never noticed this, but I'm telling you, this is what you'll find. And that pshat is not the same. Again, pshat just means simple. It's not the same thing as what the Orthodox mean by pshat. When an Orthodox Chumash talks about pshat, they mean as the sages understood it from Rashi forward. When the conservative movement talks about pshat, they mean, that, but also what modern Bible scholars engaging in modern biblical scholarly techniques understand this verse to mean best of all. And then underneath that is corresponds roughly to drash or midrash. In other words, the more homiletic meaning. And there you'll see that Eitz Chaim draws from a lot of different Jewish sources. Very, very, it's really quite, I think, admirably lowercase Catholic in its choice of where it brings its sources from. And then the Eitz Chaim has a third feature. And again, if you, I see a few of you use it, a third feature, which the next time you're in shul, if you have this chumash, take a look. It has a little long rectangular charcoal box, and it has what's called halacha lama'aseh. In other words, practical halacha. And what that practical halacha is a tracing back of a particular Jewish custom to its biblical origin. So for instance, and I hope to show you this, I really do, Gid hanasheh, the sciatic nerve, which has to be removed before you can eat that leg of an animal, according to kosher slaughter. And it's derived in Eitz Chaim, and it is indeed ultimately derived from the famous scene that we're going to read this Saturday with Jacob wrestling with the angel. And at the end, we'll get to that. And at the end of that wrestling match, as you know, his leg is put out of joint. And in Eitz Chaim, it says, this is where we get the rule about not eating the sciatic nerve. Now, that's entirely correct. But I just would say, and this getting back to the whole point of my book, and this is an extremely bibliocentric way of relating to a halakhic law. And if you were in a rabbinic academy, which I have been, you will learn the laws of kashrut or Shabbat or marriage and divorce. You may look at that Bible verse for a moment, but you'll zoom right into the codes from Shulchan Aruch to Mishnah Berurah and all the ones in between that tells you how the halakha is actually derived. But in Eitz Chaim, they're really quite interested in letting you know how our own Jewish practice is really quite directly informed by the Bible that we read and the Torah that we read. So let me now, is it okay if I already open it up for a few questions while I'm trying to find trying to find my texts?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So let me open this up to questions. If I'm looking away, don't think I'm rude. I'm trying to find my own, but I put in my own chat box. See if I can open it up. It's not exactly what I want.
And while Alan's looking, I think you can unmute yourselves now.
Yes,
and
please.
ask questions if you'd like. Are there any questions so far? Dorothy, do you have a hand up? No? Any questions? Let me see if there's any in the chat. No.
I'm very happy if you would like to also just responses or general questions. I'm very happy to talk about these as well.
Any? Okay. Oh, so Louise is saying we don't see anything in the chat. Oh, and I wonder if, Alan, you might have put in the documents before everyone arrives, so you might have to put those in again.
Okay. Let me do that. And,
okay.
Okay. Okay. Share screen. Okay. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, yay.
Okay, sorry. So let me be very little for a minute in your corner, and let me go through that. Let me give you another illustration. So here's what we talked about so far. Here's the passage that we're going to be looking at or actually the beginning of the passage. This is from Genesis 32, and this is the wrestling match with the angel. And of course, as you would expect, the different chumashim have different foci. So here in the Reform Chumash, the Plout, we're very interested in the children in the river Jabbok, in what the word struggle or strive means. And you actually have to go to the end of this weekly portion to get commentary on it, including one from Mordecai Kaplan, which is, and I'll just give me a second here. Here it is. So Kaplan, here's Mordecai Kaplan. I don't have this in front of you, but he writes, modern rationalism until recently regarded allusions to demons as the vestige of ancient superstition. Now we realize that to a large extent, ancient belief in demons was a crude way of accounting for the unconscious and almost uncontrollable forces in human nature itself. And I'll just stop there. And so obviously this is talking about the Freud and the unconscious, and that a lot of things that are presented, Kaplan says, as dreams or as these visions or this the demonic, as in this very mysterious passage about Jacob wrestling with the angel, Kaplan says we nowadays would consider that to be the wrestlings of the unconscious. And that's one of the several suggestions made about who is this guy or who is this divine being with whom Jacob wrestles. But let me read you some more from the same comment. And this is from the Reform Chumash, and they have no hesitation quoting non-Jews, women, literature, all sorts of sources, including Kaplan, who's obviously not a Reformed Jew. And then he says this: the latest outbreak of the demonic forces in the world that left Israel limping, and he's referring to the Holocaust, is very much in need of being countered by the faith that Israel will not only survive, but come away from the tragic experience with renewed strength and blessing. That is to be the meaning of the establishment of the state of Israel. As you know, Kaplan was a Zionist, and I think there very, very clearly and really profoundly understands not only the fact that Jacob needed to wrestle with this Ish, or, also I saw God Panim El Panim, or divine being. It's kind of hard to say which because both are used. But I think Kaplan is very sensitive to that. He's sensitive to the issue of survival, because in the text it's often translated, you have striven with men and gods and prevailed. When we get to the actual renaming of Jacob to Israel, that verse is often translated for you have striven with gods, men and gods, and prevailed. But really, I think if you look at the text and you look at the context, it's really a survival narrative. Jacob it's not just a wrestling match. He's survived all these years of exile. He's there. And then he wrests a blessing from this person, or Ish, or divine being, before he lets him go. And Kaplan is very sensitive to that. And like a good darshan, like a good commentator, he relates it to what's going on. He says, we've just come through the Holocaust of European Jewry, and now we have the state of Israel. This is, for Kaplan, he hopes, going to be the mark of survival. And so this is, can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, so you can see this is the old-fashioned, whether it's the red or the blue. It's kind of you can see how small and really not very user-friendly the Hebrew is here. It's really a small font. That's not my technology. That's actually, this font is too small. There aren't breaks in the aliyot, like the 7 aliyot, when you would take a break and call people up to the Torah. It was not a great synagogue Bible. It was improved in 2005. Then we have the English, then we have the commentary. But if you want that interlinear commentary, you don't get it in Plout. You have to go to one of the other Chumashim. In other words, the line-by-line commentary that a lot of us like. Okay, so let's take a look. We don't have to worry about the upside-down text. I do know that's upside down. That's Stone Chumash, a whole full page of it in Hebrew, with a little English commentary in the bottom. You'll note the Rashi is there in the Stone Chumash in Rashi script. Can most American Jews read this? Absolutely not. I don't even think most Jewish day school kids can read that. But it's there for an emotional reason, and I don't make light of it. It's there because in a lot of ways, I don't think the average Reformed Jew is going to be able to translate that Hebrew. It's there because we want the connection to the original texts. And in the case of the Orthodox Stone Chumash, that original text is Rashi in the Hebrew. So let's go down a little bit. And here we see, we're going to be looking at this Saturday. In most Orthodox congregations in America right now, this is the most popular Chumash. And what you'll read, and I don't know how well you can see it. I'm not going to even try to blow it up more. But you'll see here's the same passage, with here at the end where he's wrestling with the angel. And then you have this commentary, and I'm going to just read it because I'm not sure how well it's showing up on your screens. I have a very big screen here. Satan descends and seduces man to sin. Then he ascends and to incite God to prosecute man. Satan, the evil inclination, and the angel of death are one and the same. That's a very famous saying from the Talmud, Baba Batra. The angel of Esau had to attack Jacob, and there the stone Chumash is following Rashi that who is this Ish? It's Sar Shel Yaakov. It's the angel of Esau. Sar Shel Esav. It's the angel of Esau. It's Esau's spirit. And later on, in a lot of Jewish tradition, this Esau becomes a stand-in for Rome, first pagan Roman Empire, and then the Christian Rome. And so you have Esau equals Edom equals the oppressive force of the non-Jewish world. And here, the angel of Esau had to attack Jacob because as the last and greatest of the patriarchs, Jacob symbolized man's struggle to raise himself in the rest of the world, and Satan exists to cripple that effort. Well, I don't think that commentary, even if you don't take it literally, is still going way too far for most Reform, Reconstructionist, and conservative Jews. But I think in this audience, it's a fair enough comment. And I'll just read one thing that I just noticed that I was preparing this talk that I thought was really quite amazing, and I'm sure you won't agree with, and I don't agree with it. The Chafetz Chaim, great early 20th century commentator, used to say, the evil inclination doesn't mind if a Jew fasts, prays, and gives charity all day long, provided he does not study Torah. In other words, this is a little plug for yeshiva study, right? In other words, most of us, I think, would say a Jew who fasts and prays and gives tzedakah and engages in the Jewish community, I think for most of us, more than good enough, but not for the Chafetz Chaim. And he said, the Chafetz Chaim also says they have to be fully engaged in Talmud Torah. So that's a kind of gives you the sense of the sort of stone Chumash commentary. And then I'll show you, let's see, it's on the screen. Maybe if I go down, I'm going to go down, and if I have to go up again, I will. Here, oh, no, that's not helping. So here on the far end is I'm going to just move everybody's picture. No, I won't even bother. So here's the Eitz Chaim commentary, the conservative commentary. And this is what I was telling you before. Now you can see it. I'll see if I have a page with a halach. Here's the Peshat, and you'll see the Peshat is a very modern understanding of what Peshat is. In other words, they're doing geography, they're talking about Arab nomenclature, and they're saying, here's the fort of the Jabbok. This is where this event takes place. We can tell you where the fort of the Jabbok is in real terms. And then this man, they acknowledge the difficulty of this Ya'avek Ishimo, and a man wrestles with him. It's a man here, but in verses in 29 and 31, it's referred to as a divine being. So is it a man or is it a divine being? And again, we're still in this upper half of the commentary. This is still the plain text, and it directs you to the prophet Hosea. And there you'll see another discussion of this incident in the prophet Hosea. That's all simple shot reading of what this means. What does it mean? He wrestled with a man. What does it mean? His thigh joint was dislodged. What does it mean that he wrested the blessing? That's all pshat. And then you go down to the below the line, and you see all of what we might call is midrashic or homiletic. And here we have and I'll just read a little of this. Who is this mysterious being? The classic commentators are nearly unanimous in seeing him as evil, a malign force. He may have been Esau's guardian angel, and then a quote from Genesis Rabbah, a Midrashic collection. And so that's the sorrow shel Esav. That's well rooted in Jewish tradition. But it continues, before encountering Esau in the flesh, his spirit struggled with the spirit of Esau. And then that's a quote from the great Nechama Leibovitz, probably the greatest Torah teacher of the second half of the 20th century, and no hesitation about citing Leibovitz in here in Eitz Chaim or in the Torah Modern Commentary, despite the fact that she really, at some points, really is quite independent. She's a master of the traditional commentary, but is also quite independent of them. And so just to give you an example, if you were to look in the, I don't have it with me, or do I? Yeah. If you were to look in the Hama Leibovitz Studies in Genesis, on this week's Torah portion by Yishlach, she starts off by saying, you know, we're not going to worry about the difference between Rambam, Maimonides, who thinks this is all a dream, it didn't really happen at all, and Ramban, Nachmanides, who insists it happened in the actual world. We're not even, Nechama Leibovitz says, I don't even care. She doesn't say it like that. I'm being more flip to highlight how independent a thinker she is. She's saying, this is not, doesn't matter. What matters is the message that the Torah is trying to convey in this scene. And in her opinion, it is, and I think a lot of modern commentators would see it the way she does, it is Jacob, who up until now in the Bible has been a trickster, has gotten things in a really very dicey way. I mean, with his brother Esau to get the right of the firstborn, the Bechor, he really bargains him, Esau, when he's famished, for a bowl of red lentil stew. And, you know, he trades the red lentil stew for the right of the firstborn. And then even worse, with his mother's, Rebekah's help, he really completely deceives his father Isaac and gets the blessing that has to be bestowed to only one son. And so and with Laban, if you've been following in Genesis the last few weeks, with Laban, he's tricky as hell, Jacob. And the spotted and the speckled sheep trick. And, you know, he's really, Jacob is a Ekev. One of the meanings of Ekev is heel. And one of the meanings of Jacob is heel snake. You know, he's been a snaky guy. And here he's no longer, I'm just parroting Nechama Leibovitz, mainly because I always agree with her, but also because I think it's such a great comment. Here, Jacob really becomes Israel. He honestly confronts the opposition and wrestles with it. He may not win. I don't think he does, but he survives and he persists. And he gets the blessing to be Israel. And then that renaming is confirmed a couple of chapters later. So here's what I'm, to conclude. I think all of them, this is just more of the same. This is also from Eitz Chaim, but we've already talked about it, so I won't continue it. And I think really the conclusion that we should draw from this is that all three of these Chumashim are really very, very fine synagogue Chumashim, depending on what you want. If you want a Chumash that is really unabashedly looking at the Bible as a human text and is willing to focus on, the literary and aesthetic lessons and to discuss and argue about the moral lessons. So the Reform, the Torah Modern Commentary is a great Chumash. If you want to get the feel of your great-great-grandparents in, Warsaw or Bialystok or Vilna in the 17th or 18th or 19th centuries or 16th or 15th centuries. So really, and you don't really want to be bothered with the academic stuff, the modern Bible scholarly stuff, I think actually the Stone Chumash is wonderful for that purpose. I don't think you should give the Stone Chumash as your text if you're presenting a paper for the Association of Jewish Studies, but most of us are not doing that most of the time. And finally, if you want to have the best of both possible worlds, if you'd like to know both what modern biblical scholarship has to say about our Torah, but you also would like some sense of what the great Meforshim, the great commentators, said over the ages, then I think you have Eitz Chaim in your pew, and I think that's a wonderful text too. So again, my point here is really, and I'm going to stop sharing, my point here really is that we have three wonderful synagogue humashim, and they really reflect the diverse nature of American Jewry. They all answer a real need. And if I were to roll it back just a wee bit, I would say they're all illustrations in their own way of what I would call the Renaissance of the modern Jewish Bible. So I'm hoping I've given you something, provoked a little thought, and I'm happy to talk about the weekly portion, happy to talk about the Chumashim, happy to talk about what it really other issues that in Bible, in reading Bible, that you find interesting. Please speak up.
So, Alan, thank you. And I'll begin with a question that I think you've covered some of this along the way, and I'm not certain that it's a question that is answerable in a few minutes. But I'm struck by the fact that we have these great works of scholarship, both traditional, modern, and both, readily available to anyone going to synagogue, as well as anyone who is interested in having these publications on their own. And I guess I just still find it very curious, except in an observant synagogue where there will be many people who will pick up the stone Chumash, and maybe they won't be reading the Rashi and understanding it, but they can read the Hebrew often and understand it if they've had a yeshiva background, so that it's, I would say, maybe a little more practical or useful in that setting. Or no, it's more, it's used more maybe in those settings. And in the other synagogues, yes, we pick them up and we read the commentaries, and sometimes we go to the back and read some of the other historical articles that are there. But I find it striking that even though there are many parts of the more liberal commentaries that many Jews who pick up the book will not read and understand, there are other components of those publications for us to read and understand. And yet they're very comprehensive. And you have referred to this, that there is a desire to be connected in a very serious way to the text, to the commentaries. And so can you just comment on that I think it says that there's a lot of Jewish people in the Jewish community in the U.S. that want to know things and want to learn. They will learn some things from reading some of these Chumashim, but we will not be having an erudite, Jewishly knowledgeable community in the liberal Jewish community that will really use all of what's there in those translations.
Wow.
Did you understand any of that?
I did. I think it is an awfully big question. I'm not quite sure how to unpeel that, except to say we're really living in an age. No, first of all, I would say, just like nobody obeys all 613 commandments, there's no such person because a good, whatever, 150 of them are temple related or is it land of Israel related, or just out of date. So there's no Jew I know who obeys all 613. There's no Jew I know who doesn't obey a good number, And so I say that's my analogy. It's like nobody could be, you can't be a master of everything. Right. I don't care, our teacher, I'm going to be a little autobiographical here with Debbie, our teacher, Jeremy Cohn. I once said to him, I was bemoaning the fact that my progress in Talmud was so slow. And he said to me, and Jeremy is a complete genius, his father and mother, his father was the chancellor of Jewish Theological Seminary. His mother was an eminent American historian. And Jeremy said, that's how I feel when I study with people who started in a yeshiva world. I feel like I'm catching up with them. Mm-hmm. And so nobody can be the master of all Jewish tradition. And even the people from the yeshiva world are, of course, not masters, nor do they have much interest in the whole world of Jewish academia that, you and I spent so much time mastering. Mm-hmm. And so we have to get, I think one of the main things we must do is just not be anxious about the fact that we're never going to master it all. And instead, just adopt the attitude that we are so fortunate to have so much at our fingertips. Mm-hmm. And I just would say, I think I would say that to almost any Jew at any stage of their lives. It's like what speaks to you and what gives you edification, pleasure, that's great. It's I really believe that. We're living in a world now, I feel that sadly, everything has to be either monetized or people say, what's the value? It's like, I'm so glad I'm Jewish and I'm the heir to a tradition that says there's really nothing better than learning. I don't feel like I need to justify that any more than I need to justify the love I have for my friends and family. It's like, that's the end point to me. So We're very lucky that we live. We're very lucky we're now living in a time when if we're heirs to the Jewish tradition, we can just dive in anywhere. So I see there's a question in the chat box about JPS, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But I want to just show yet another thing. This was, I don't know if a lot of you have seen this. This is from a guy named Michael Sarasek. He's a professor at University of Pennsylvania. He spent the last 30 years translating Mikraot Gedolot into English, the rabbinic Bible. So anybody, well, it's kind of expensive actually, but anybody who wants to cough up the money can buy Genesis through Deuteronomy, and you'll have Rashi, Ibn Ezra, Rambam, Rashbam, Nachman, and Sforno right at your fingertips. And it's an amazing thing that used to, I'm a little bit, I think Michael is an amazing person. I'm a little bit ambivalent, only in the extent that I think it really takes down the, it really kills the initiative to try to master these texts in the original. Oh. But it's worth it. It's worth it. If it makes it available to that many people, I can live with that. And I'm so glad that Michael spent the last 30 years doing it. He waited on Genesis till last because he figured there were so many more people who wanted to read the sages on Genesis than Leviticus or Deuteronomy or Numbers. He knew that if he did this one first, everybody would lose interest. So he's a clever lad, is Michael. And Safaria, oh gosh. Safaria, Safaria is just unbelievable. And thank you. I'm not sure who put that up there.
Yeah, Sandy did. And
Sandy, Safaria is just unbelievable resource. And
Alan, tell people what Safaria is for those who haven't met it yet.
Yes, I will be glad to do that. Safaria is an online, it's free. It's an online, all of Tanakh, all of the Hebrew Bible, plus, it didn't even start off with Bible, all of Talmud, And it's like, I think it's like Wikipedia in the sense that it's been built out by the users. In other words, people will upload the Rashi, or they'll upload all the commentaries. People will upload, some people will do worksheets on like the development of kashrut or the development of Sabbath law. And then they'll upload those worksheets. And Sefaria, I think if I can do this quickly without messing everything up, I will. So let me just do this, go back to my text once again. I won't, because I want to show you, this is, if I can go up, I should be able to go up, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's from Sefaria. And I just copied and pasted this, and you can do English, you can choose English, you can choose Hebrew, or you can choose both. And you can do this for any passage in Tanakh, any passage in the whole Babylonian Talmud or Jerusalem Talmud. Midrashim now they're adding. It's an amazing thing. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so thank you. Yeah. And it's a combination, even the term is such genius. Safari, like going on a safari, and Sefer, meaning book in Hebrew. So even the name is great, but everything about it is great.
And so, Alan, let's do the question we have in the chat about the JPS edition, and I think that that's all we're going to have time for. So the question is, where does the JPS edition fall in the mix? Yeah,
see, that's what happens when you get me started. You can see now that I'm ready to go now for a couple more hours. Yeah. Well, JPS is, I tell you a little, JPS is it's a wonderful story. Jewish Publication Society in 1917, I'll just take a minute because it is a great story. In 1917, they did the first version of JPS. It's called often OJPS, Old JPS. And it's hilarious. It's really the funniest Bible translation because they got a couple of guys from Lithuania, Max Margolis and Alexander Marx. They told them to translate the Bible, and so these guys thought, well, it ought to sound like King James, but these are basically Eastern European Jews. I mean, their English was fine, but the translation they came up with in 1917 sounds like a kind of a pseudo King Jamesian. It's as if King James had gone to Cheder in Vilna, then came back to New York and translated the Bible. So old JPS, it's good for what it was. But in 1960s, Harry Orlinsky and editorial board said we really need a new JPS, and that's the one that was first translated in. They finished it in the early 70s. That's the translation that Gunther Plaut uses in the Reform Chumash. That's the one in a later edition of JPS that is used in Eitz Chaim. It's the most commonly used Jewish Bible translation. JPS is so it's very prevalent. You'll see it in Chumashim. You'll see it in collections. When I did a book on Joseph with Jewish Publication Society, part of the agreement was that I use the JPS translation and leave it alone. And I think they do that with all their authors. The JPS translation is great, but it is like any translation. It makes some very big choices. And in their case, the choice they made that some people don't like so much is they focus quite a lot on what's called the source language as opposed to the target language. In other words, the JPS is very, very good readable English. It's often also very far away from the Hebrew original in terms of syntax and word order. And it doesn't, that was a conscious decision on the part of the JPS translation team. If you ask me, who's your favorite Bible translator? Easy answer, Robert Alter. Because Robert Alter, in addition to having perfect Hebrew, is originally a scholar of modern literature, the modern novel. And I'm sure a lot of you have used Robert Alter's translations, whether you know it or not, you probably have. I think he's the modern translator who does the best at both being really faithful to the Hebrew, but also getting that English register, that English translation right, I think almost all the time. So he's an amazing guy. Everett Fox is with. Sandy's obviously a Bible aficionado. I don't know where you are, Sandy, but thanks for your comments. Yeah, Everett Fox is great. Hi, Sandy. Everett Fox did the exact opposite of JPS. In other words, JPS focused a lot on the English language. Fox, following Buber and Rosenzweig, sticks very close to the Hebrew cadence and syntax. And Fox, when you have to almost read him out loud, and he wants that, he does that deliberately. He's following in this tradition of Martin Buber and Franz Rosenzweig, who were very keen on they did a prior translation into German, but they wanted it to sound like Hebrew, even though it was in German. Mm-hmm. And so Fox and JPS are on opposite ends, and they both have their virtues. You know, by now you've been with me a couple of hours. You know where I stand clearly enough. All of them are good. It's all Torah. It's all great work. It just depends on what you're looking for at that particular reading.
Alan, thank you so much for spending time with us tonight, sharing your vast knowledge with us, and bringing some things to mind that we'll continue to think about, especially for those of us who are part of B'nai Chavurah. I think when we go to the cart the next time to pick up the Chumash we're going to use for the Torah service, we'll definitely be thinking about it in different ways. So I thank you for that.
Well, then my work is done. I want to thank you all for your time and attention, and thank you, Debbie. And if you want to zoom into any of our many lectures or programs this semester or anytime, just email me. We're easy to find. We are definitely the major Jewish studies department in Oklahoma.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. Have a good evening.
Thank you.